We are. So, first of all, good evening. I really appreciate you being here. Again, sorry for the delay, but as you just heard, lots of bad weather, and some of you may or may not know who actually Dr. Paul Arciero is. I see some familiar faces and some newer faces. So, just want to just intro him real quick. That when he does is able to jump on, that we can just go ahead and get started. So Dr. Paul Arciero is a leading international nutrition and applied physiology scientist. He is truly an expert in fitness, in nutrition. He's published many peer-reviewed studies in a lot of well-known publications around the world. And he's also a scientist and on the Isogenics Advisory Board. And I know a lot of you have heard of Dr. Arciero through Isogenics, and of course the race to maintenance protocol that and the protein pacing that he works with so closely with Peter Greenlaw. But tonight I really want to focus on his expertise and his knowledge around protein in general. So as we all know, and I'm of course going to bring this up, and there's his book. Katya's holding up his book. And you can Google him. So there's a lot of, like, if you Google Dr. Paul Arciero, he is a big deal. Like, I honestly never really knew what a big deal he is. He is very well known in the industry. Like, a lot of people that are not at all linked to isogenics or to the nutrition have heard of Dr. Paul Arciero. Like, he is known in his industry. And if we go a little longer, and I'm just gonna text him back real quick, and say, because of the storm, just it is what it is, right? And so he's tonight. What I want to really talk to him about is, and I don't see any men here except Galaxy Note 8, so that may be a man, but everybody else here is a woman, and a lot of them are like my age that I see. Like, I don't know everybody because I just see some, not everybody's on camera. But he's going to be talking about protein for different levels, different wakes of life, right? So there's the athletes, there's the non-athletes, there's those going through menopause. And that's really something that, and Stacy's laughing, right? Because we're all like going to experience it at some point if we're not already. And protein isn't protein, right? I mean, I personally have been a vegetarian since the age of 12. So it's a long time that I have not eaten meat. So I need to get my protein from somewhere. And of course, this is not about isogenics. So I get a lot of my protein through isogenics, but not everybody's on isogenics. Not everybody does the shakes, right? So there's different sources of protein, and then it changes as we get older. I know an athlete probably, and I'm not an expert, I'm just throwing it out there, but an athlete probably needs a whole lot more protein than a non-athlete or somebody sedentary or somebody going through menopause. So those are the things that, we're going to touch on tonight, as well as some lifestyles that have become very trendy and very popular over the years. And, are they good for us? A lot of what the media tells us, it's good for us. But, coming from an expert, a scientist, somebody who's researched this for many, many, many years, it is, it'll be interesting to hear what Dr. Paul Arciero's thoughts on it are. So again, for those jumping on a little late, Dr. Arciero texted me and he said had a big storm push through and is having trouble with his internet and he's trying to log on now. But we'll just be patient. And if you want to, even in the chat, and there he is. uh, Good evening, Dr. Arciero.
Hi, everybody. So
I hope
sorry.
you're I hope you're not like in any dangerous situation with the
No,
storm. That's good.
no, I'm not. Just sometimes when these storms move through at this time of year in the Northeast, they come through pretty vicious. So anyway, yeah, just unfortunate.
Absolutely.
But
It,
we're all together. So thanks for having me, Sandy. And I'm ready to dive right in. I don't know what you've discussed, but let me know what
Perfect.
you want me to move through it.
So I basically just told everybody who you are because not everybody on the call knows who you are. So you know who you are, so I don't have to repeat that piece. And first of all, thank you so much for getting on. And I know the challenges. So let us dive right in. So as I had said to you, I'd like to talk about the different protein requirements for your average person, for your athlete, and then of course going into like menopause. Do the requirements change? Does an athlete need more protein? And what are the different sources of protein? And does it matter? For example, I'm a vegetarian. I've been one for 42 years, haven't eaten meat. So I wanted, since you are the protein expert, for you to touch a little bit on protein. And I am recording. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So yeah, I'm glad that you started that way. First of all, welcome everyone and hello. Uh, I'm happy to be here. And if you're not familiar with my research, I think it's always an excellent starting point for anybody that talks about health and wellness, nutrition, fitness. They should start from a foundation of evidence-based, peer-reviewed scientific research. So I say that because I would encourage all of you to go visit. There's an overarching library called PubMed. And so it's publications in the medical science field, but it's kind of the gold standard of scientific rigor. And so I would just, if you're not sure of who I am or what I'm saying to you tonight, and you're not maybe feeling 100% confident, I would check out PubMed database, library database, and Google Scholar. Google Scholar is another one. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Google. Google puts together a scholarly database as well of peer-reviewed scientists. So you can Google my name there. And if you do that, you might see that there's been a recent heavy traffic of my name because I've published two recent scientific papers. One is on the exercise time of day. So if you were to type in my name and the best time of day to exercise, you'll see my name because I was just interviewed pretty heavily last week with the BBC and all different types of major news outlets. So yeah, and I think that's really important. So I just want to provide that extra layer of confidence that I'm not just some maybe media guru around fitness and wellness and nutrition. I'm actually a scientist who's done the research, but then also worked with people on the kind of at the grassroots level. So I have been someone who's worked with individuals and large groups for many, many decades. So protein is a great place to start because one of the other papers I had published last week that has now gotten a little more press as well recently is this concept of intermittent nutritional fasting and protein pacing. So I'm going to stay focused on the protein pacing because Sandy wanted me to speak specifically to that. So protein is the vital nutrient. In fact, in Greek, protein proteos means primary, essential. And when we first came up with nutrients that our bodies needed in kind of a triage level of necessity, protein has come in first every time. So there's really not another nutrient. And I know many of you might be following the keto or the Mediterranean or the plant-based. I mean, the list goes on of different nutrition and dietary patterns that people can do, regardless of whatever one you might be doing or have done or thinking about doing. Protein and the adequate and necessary amount is the most important thing you can focus on, even if you're eating keto, right, which is very high fat, up to 90% in some cases. Protein is critical and when you're eating that protein. So how much do we need? And how much do we need if we are somebody who is 25 years old and very, very active, high metabolism, exercising 4 or 5 days a week, versus somebody who is postmenopausal, um, in their late 50s, 60s, and feeling like their hormones are running amok, and determining, every health goal that they're pursuing, and not letting them get there. So it runs the whole gamut. So here's how I would break it down. At the very minimum, so at the very lowest level of adequate amounts of protein that our body requires, would be 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So you have to do a couple of conversions, but they're actually really easy. You just take your body weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2, and that tells you how many kilograms you weigh. And then just multiply that number by 1.2. So it's the number of pounds we weigh. So as an example, if somebody weighed 150 pounds, you would take 150 pounds. Oh, see, the internet has got my phone not working properly right now. Let's see, I just was able to reboot it. So if we were 150 pounds and we were to divide it by 2.2, that equals 68 kilograms. And then you'd multiply that times 1.2. And that equals 81 or 82 grams of protein. That's really, really low. So that would be your absolute minimum of what you would take in. I just want to make sure I did that right. Divided by 2.2 equals 68 times 1.2 equals, 82 grams. So that would be a very, very low amount. So how do you know how much you should get specific to you? Well, there's a couple of factors that would come into play. Your age for sure makes a difference. So that I'm giving you the minimum because everything else goes up from there. So your age would require you to take in a little bit more. If you are trying to lose weight, that would mean that you would have to take in a significantly greater amount as well. If you are generally active, you would take in a significantly greater amount, even more so than sometimes people that are more active. So if you are someone who is diabetic, type 2, I'm talking about, who has cardiovascular disease, so high blood lipids, high blood pressure, you would require a greater amount of dietary protein. So those are some of the important determinants of what would determine an increased amount of dietary protein. So that's the kind of the overall amount that I would recommend people not go under. So if you were 150 pounds, 1.2 would be the absolute. So then what would determine that to go up? Well, if you're above 40 years old, you should go up at least in terms of the amount to 1.4 to 1.5 would be probably the minimum that you would take if you were above 40 years old. And the reason is because as we age, our body doesn't metabolize dietary protein as well as it did when we were less than 40 years old. So instead of doing 1.2, that would be if you're kind of a younger, healthier person, you could maybe get away with it. But if you're somebody who's over 40, you would go up to 1.4 to 1.5. If you're postmenopausal because of the hormonal changes that are taking place, if you're somebody who has type 2 diabetes and you've got a more difficult time with your lean muscle mass being activated and turned on, you would have to go up to about 1.6. If you're overweight by more than 10 pounds, and you need to lose weight to reduce your risk for cardiovascular, heart disease, or metabolic disease, diabetes, or certain other inflammatory conditions, you would want to increase it to a minimum of 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So in our example of the person that weighed 150 pounds, that would put them at 1.8, given all of these other factors. If they're a woman who's postmenopausal, has some extra weight to lose, you'd want to be at a minimum of 123 grams of protein. So that's how much you would want to take in over the course of a day. So I might have addressed specifically some of you that fall into this category of over 50, 55, you're peri postmenopausal, you've got some hormones raging, you've got some extra body weight that you need to lose. You're trying to exercise to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Maybe you've had an increase in blood sugar, so you're pre-diabetic, or maybe not quite, but you're having some fluctuation. You've got high blood lipids, perhaps. You want to be at a minimum of 123 grams of protein. So what would that look like? How would you, distribute that? I'm going to round it up to 125 grams just for ease of calculation. So you'd want to divide that amount of protein up evenly throughout the day. You definitely don't want to wait until the end of the day to eat it. You don't want to what we call front load it too much earlier on in the day, because you want to make sure that you have enough right before you go to bed at night, so that it is serving your body optimally during nighttime, when you're activating all of those cellular beneficial processes to help you, maintain and build that healthy, lean muscle mass. So you want to maybe divide that up over 4 meals, and that's going to be about 30 grams of protein at each of your 4 different eating occasions. And I call them eating occasions because sometimes you can use it, you can consume that as a snack or sometimes as a meal. So I think for the clientele, or those of you that are on this right now that Sandy kind of mentioned were on this call, this postmenopausal age group, maybe some extra weight that you need to lose. And I know that might not be everybody, so just bear with me and we'll get to other cases, such as what some of you might be. 30 grams, I'm going to call it a day right there. You should be at a minimum of 30 grams of protein. Now you're probably saying, gosh, Dr. Paul, that seems excessive. It's not at all, because if you were to multiply, I'm going to do this, I know this is a little math heavy, but it's pretty simple. 125 times 4. And the reason why I multiply it by 4 is because every gram of protein is 4 calories. That only equals, you ready for this? This is going to blow all of you right out of your seats right now. That's only 500 calories. So, if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, then that might be high for some of you, but I'm going to talk about the importance of making sure that you're consuming enough calories over the course of a day, because if you consume less than a critical amount, which is about 1,600 calories a day, even if you're not that active, and even if you're a smaller framed person, you're going to adversely affect your metabolism. And so if it's the right type of calories in the form that I'm telling you right now, high quality protein, this is not a lot at all. So 500 calories is minimal of protein a day. 500 calories total of protein. That's what all of you should be aiming for. That amount is essential. I'll go so far as to say that. And this is by by a very large degree, not anywhere near a high protein diet, right? So 500 calories of somebody that's eating, let's just round it off to 2,000 calories a day. I know some of you might not be doing that, but I'm going to hopefully get you there by the end of the time I finish tonight, because of the other aspects I'm going to talk about. That's only 25% of your total intake. So 25%. So you must be then asking, well, gosh, what's the other 75%, Dr. Paul? Well, that's fat and carbohydrate. So this is another reason why you don't want to go under this amount. Now, no one should be eating just 1,000 calories a day, but even if you were consuming, let's just say 1,500 calories, that would be kind of a minimum amount. That would be 30% of your intake, roughly 33% or so. So that's not a lot. 33%, leaving the other 67% as fat and carbohydrate, is about the minimum that you should go. So I hope right off the bat, I've dispelled any misconception about, the amount of protein or what's required to allow you to stay in optimal health. It's 25 to 30%. Now, if you're in the need of losing more weight than that, let's say you have 25 pounds or more to lose, you would have to increase that even higher. So instead of 30 grams during 4 different eating occasions, a meal or a snack, you should up that to 35. And there's actually no question about that. That would only put you at 140 grams a day. I'd like to get you to 150 if you've got more than 25 pounds to lose. So if some of you have 25 pounds to lose, at the minimum amount that you should be eating of protein a day should be 35 grams at 4 different eating occasions. That would give you 140 grams. That's on the low side. I'm giving you kind of the minimum amount that you should be taking. Now, if you've heard anything different, I can just rest assured in terms of, from a scientific, real life application of this, that person doesn't understand nutrition and has never studied it and has never worked with people out in the wild of the world. I've been doing it for 35 years, and I know that these are truisms, not because I've studied it in the lab, but because I've worked with literally tens of thousands of people in the work that I do as a consultant, and know this to be the case of reality. So 30 grams, if you're somebody who's looking to lose a little bit of weight, manage your menopausal symptoms a little bit better with your hormones, and allow you to nourish your body at the level that will begin to snap you into a healthier health status. If you're somebody who needs to lose more than that 10 pounds, closer to 20 to 25 or more, then you should be at 35 grams. So people that are morbidly obese, we put them on 40 grams as a minimum for 4 meals a day. That would be 160 grams of protein. So that's a minimum. Sometimes we go up as high as 45. So I hope that helped. Now, if you're somebody who, so if you need to lose weight, you need to up that protein. The more weight you need to lose, the more protein you need to include in your nutrition. Again, keeping it at somewhere around that 30 to 35, maybe in some cases I go up to 40%. So, we're still not getting to that, high level of what we call high protein diets, just because I don't think those are that long-term very beneficial for people. It's not that they're harmful necessarily, but they're just not beneficial. So there's kind of an upper limit of threshold. So once we get past that 35 to 40 grams per meal, or 35 to 40% of our total intake of calories, then that additional protein doesn't seem to be that much more beneficial. The only case that it is for some of you, for example, who want to increase your muscle mass because you're into performance building, body sculpting. So, they call it bodybuilding, but, it's also fitness modeling. So if you want to put on some additional healthy, lean muscle mass, you want to build a lot more lean body mass. In those rare examples, and there's not a lot of people in the population who do this, but for those that do, there may be the need to increase it up to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then for some athletes that are in season, that are expending, and I don't know how many of you are on this call that are in that category, but I'm going to do it just for the sake of doing it. You're going to be at that higher level of intake. So here's the irony. People that are more sedentary and have more weight to lose are more similar to what the extreme athletes, the bodybuilders, the physique builders, the athletes that are in season, burning massive amounts of calories and expending themselves at a very high level of exertion, they're much more similar in their amount of protein. I know that hopefully it's blowing a lot of your minds right now, but this is a truism. This is a scientific fact that the amount of protein that you should be taking in is similar between those two groups, even though they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum of what many people would refer to as optimal health. That if you're an extreme athlete, you're burning massive amounts of calories, you're an endurance athlete, you're a physique bodybuilder, you're an in-sport athlete, you want to be at that 1.8 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein intake in order to help you maintain and then build a little bit more muscle, If you're somebody who is not exercising at all, you're relatively sedentary, you've got 20 or more, 25 pounds or more body weight to lose, body fat especially. You might be postmenopausal, or you might be in menopause, for men, and that same age category. Well, then you should be up at that 1.8, in some cases 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So I hope I blew some minds there, because that has to happen. No, I really mean that. So now the next question, Sandy, comes down to the quality of the protein. And you guys, I know, probably have questions, but I wanted to get that out. And there's really no debate about that. If you're hearing differently from other people, I can just tell you that they're probably not someone that you want to take too much health information from, because there's not much debate on that. That level of protein is a minimum amount, and you're not even close to, what we would consider to be a high protein diet. Because The other nutrients that you have to then fill in to make up for that other 60 to 75% is what? Carbohydrate and fat. And those are the nutrients that get us into trouble when it comes to our health. So that's reason alone to pay attention to those numbers that I just provided you. So then it comes down to the quality of the protein. And by the way, if you're somebody who is not in that category, before I jump to the quality, you're somebody who is at a healthy body weight, and you maybe have 4 or 5 pounds either direction, maybe to gain or to lose, you don't need it at that level of protein, even if you're active. So some of you that might be exercising 4 or 5 days a week, hopefully not more than that. You shouldn't be ever exercising more than 5 days a week. You should be generally active every day, but you definitely should not be exercising more than 4. I'd put it at 4. If you go to 5, that would be the absolute maximum, and they shouldn't be high intensity bouts all of those 5 days. But if you're exercising and you're getting up and running, miles, or hitting the gym, or elliptical or Peloton or CrossFit or blah, 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 and you're doing it more than 4 or 5 times a week, well, then that's word for concern, because that's an excessive amount. Nobody does that. Even the most extreme elite athletes, they're not exercising nearly that strenuous. And don't be misled. I've played professional tennis, and I've lived among world-class athletes for many decades. So I know what they do on a regular basis, and they're not burning themselves to the ground like the general population is. And where this came about, that we should be in a gym for 5-6 days a week, is insanity. Truly, it's insanity. No one does that. So just know that the professional athletes that you watch are not doing that. They would be completely burned out and injured and not performing well if they did. So if you are somebody who's doing a healthy level of exercise for 4 days, I'm going to use 4 because that's the sweet spot. And then 3 days, you're just staying active. Maybe you're walking, 4,000 steps or up to 10,000 if, on a day of, a little bit more physical activity, you're gardening and things like that. Your body is in a high state of protein synthesis, meaning that if you're eating well and you're eating the quality of proteins that I'm going to talk about in a second, you don't need as much. 1.4 to 1.6, so that amount of about 1.5 grams is all you need, because your body's very efficient. Your body's doing a really good job because you're keeping it healthy. You're maintaining a healthy weight. So you don't need to go up to a higher level of protein like people that need to lose more weight and who are not exercising. Because when you don't exercise, your protein requirement increases. When you get over 40 years old, your protein requirement increases. When you're exercising really strenuously because you're in season, or you're in a heavy training mode at the time, so you're doing 4 days, or rarely would they be doing 5, but you're doing 4 days of really high volume endurance exercise or bodybuilding type exercise, well, then you need to have that higher protein. But for 90% of the population, you probably don't need that. Well, I shouldn't say that, because now much more of the population is overweight and obese. So let's say, the 30% of the population that's not overweight or obese. That's funny how I've had to change those numbers around. So if you're in that category of people that are at a healthy weight, plus or minus, we usually use 5 pounds for people, because weight fluctuates by that much on a regular basis. Your protein requirement can be 1.3 to 1.5. Because you're working really efficiently. All right, we got through that now. That's a great place to start. And I'm really excited that we started there, because it's actually the most important thing I can say to you tonight. Other than what I'm going to say now, no, all this is important. But the quality of the protein. We know without any debate, Sandy said that she's been vegetarian, plant-based for decades, and that's wonderful. And I'm sure, given that she's been doing it that long, she's a real sleuth about what are the most high quality plant sources of protein, because plant is an inferior, so it's a less than optimal type of protein. That's just a given fact. There's no debate over that. I don't care if you've watched Game Changers or the China study, Forks Over Knives, and all those other movies. Listen, I'm a plant-based guy primarily, although I eat meat because I know or I should say animal, not meat, but animal protein, because it's the superior, it's the top shelf of what we can provide our body. There's no debate of that. We know that a good sourced, grass-fed, pasture-raised, out in the wild of the world source of animal protein is the highest source of protein that our bodies can metabolize. And that's just a known fact. There's no debate. I'm not passing judgment or providing my opinion here. It's just scientific fact. And in fact, I was consulting with a farm the other day, and they do grass-fed, and they said, we know a little bit about, how well our animals are taken care of, but we also have read that the quality of the meat is much different than a conventionally raised chicken, beef, cattle, pork, whatever it is. And I said, unquestionably, absolutely, you're right. We know that the fatty acid composition, the vitamin and mineral composition of that meat is on a whole different scale of a conventionally sourced type of animal meat. So they're on two opposite ends of the spectrum. And much like people say, oh, I eat plant-based or vegetarian, and they go and buy pesticide-ridden or conventionally grown plants, vegetables, fruits. Well, those are on a pretty crappy end of the scale. So those would be closer to, so just because you say that you're a vegetarian or you're plant-based and you're eating conventionally produced produce, plants, fruits and vegetables, doesn't mean you're healthy by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you know what they put on those plants to make them look as colorful and bountiful and beautiful as they are. Those are as, potentially harmful to our body and our health than a piece of conventional meat. So you don't want to classify those two things as the same. If you want apples to apples would be a grass-fed, pasture-raised, wild, piece of animal meat or protein, whatever it might be, whey protein included. That's on the opposite end and at the highest level of optimal health. Second tier would be the plant-based versions that are organic and sourced from a local farm that's not using harsh chemicals and pesticides and growth factors to incorporate into the plant, and the soil and the water that that they're using to water it. Those would be the next tier, and then conventional meat, conventional plants would be the last sourced quality of protein. So I hope that helped, because there's a real misconception. So of the types of animal protein that are of the highest quality, whey protein is the #1 source. We know that undenatured, that means it hasn't been transformed by human hands. It's in its most natural state of form of where we derive it from in terms of the curds and whey and that processing of the dairy. Whey is the highest quality. It's got an amino acid matrix and composition profile, whatever you want to call it, that is the most ideal for our body to absorb and make we call bioavailable. It just means the absorption of it. So whey protein is the best, and undenatured whey protein concentrate is #1. Eggs are of a very high source, and then of course wild, out in the wild game, and fish, poultry, pork, beef, all those things are close behind. Of the plant types, again, it would be the plant-based sources of organic, locally raised and produced, low chemical residue plants and vegetables. I should say fruits and vegetables would be the next source. So things like mung bean, fava bean, peas, lentils. So legumes would be what you would want to source as your protein sources for those of you that want to go down that. And they both have different strengths, right? The animal proteins are of the most ideal amino acid composition, so the quality is so high, and we don't need that much because our body's absorbing it so well. So that would be the top form of protein that we would want to consume. And then with the plant-based versions, you need a little bit more because our body doesn't absorb the plant protein amino acids as well. So the protein requirement goes up a little bit more if you're going to be plant-based. So I do a mix of both. I do probably 60 to maybe at certain times 70% plant-based, and then 30 to 40% high quality animal protein. So that works for me. I like the texture, the taste, the versatility of plant protein, really high quality. plant protein, but it works for me. And I intermix it with some just absolutely highest quality whey protein concentrate and other animal products, wild fish, wild game. So we have elk in our, we very rarely are without, wild elk, which is of the highest sourced kind of beef protein that you can consume. So that's what I would recommend to all of you. A good, Greek yogurt is good for those of you that would do dairy, and calcium intake is really important. So that kind of addresses the quality component, and so let's talk just real briefly about the hormones, especially with menopause. Obviously with the plummeting of estrogen, and there was just a great paper that came out in a leading scientific journal that showed that when we can help replace some of the estrogen in women that have reached menopause, that is a massive initiator, turning on of protein synthesis, and helps with body composition, because it's ultimately your body composition that dictates your overall health. And so because when we reach menopause, we have this drastic change in various hormones, particularly with estrogen, our body just doesn't maintain that lean body mass. And so that's why women begin to deposit more of their weight around their waist region, less around their glutes and hips and thighs. And so it's a real frustration for them. Risk of inflammatory diseases, certain cancers go up, of course. So being able to maintain that. So protein and high quality protein intake is massively important to help balance those hormones out.
Dr. Paul, real quick, Katya just asked about what about milk, like raw organic milk?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, unless you are 100% confident with the raw milk and where it's coming from, just because, pasteurization does help eliminate some of the potential for bacteria and pathogens to get into the milk. But if you have a really high quality sourced and pretty much guaranteed form of the raw milk, then sure, that could be good. And having the fat in the milk. So dairy is fine. I know not everyone is a fan of it, so you really have to. I'm not making a blanketed statement to say, hey, all of you should go out and drink dairy. But if you're someone who tolerates it well, you know the sourcing of where it's coming from, and you can really feel good about the quality of it, then 100%, yeah, dairy, Greek yogurt, milk and Greek yogurt are excellent choices of protein, particularly if they're full fat. So I'm not a big fan of skimmed products or no fat products. It's just not good, because what's the alternative? Well, it's carbohydrate. And that's not really good for us if that's what we're eating. So the combination, let me just talk real quickly about the combinations of these foods with protein. When you eat protein, it's perfectly acceptable to consume it with other nutrients, carbohydrates and fats. What I would recommend is that when you consume your protein in the morning, consume it with fruits that have fiber. So that would be berries or a high water content. That would be more like melons and apple. So morning before noon is when you want to fuel your body with fruit, particularly fibrous fruit. Berries would be optimally. Blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, cranberries. So you want to eat your fruit before noon, because there is a higher sugar content, but you've also got the fiber to help balance that higher sugar content, but rich in antioxidants. So link your protein with berries. So a cup of Greek yogurt and some blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, blah, 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 cranberries, whatever you want to throw in there for berries. Great source of nourishment. Afternoon, you want to minimize your fruit intake and increase your vegetable intake. Now, you can throw vegetables in your morning shake or in your morning meal as well if you wanted to. Vegetables, they're kind of permissible any time of day, particularly if they're green leafy vegetables or high antioxidant rich type of vegetables, certain summer squashes and things like that. Other ones would be, carrots to some degree, better raw carrots than cooked carrots because of but celery, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, any green leafy vegetable, broccoli, I think I said already. Those you can eat any time of day, but particularly afternoon, you want to make sure that those are your carbohydrate sources, afternoon. So when you combine protein And carbohydrate, just pay attention to the type of carbohydrate. Starchy carbohydrates, less so later on in the day, afternoon. For most people, this is generally for people that are looking to control weight and body composition and minimize fat deposition around their belly, their visceral fat. You want to minimize grains after noon, just because of their higher starch content and likelihood of releasing insulin, which then gets stored in your visceral abdominal region. So it's a foolproof way for people to drop pounds around their belly. So eat your grains, eat your oatmeal or your quinoa, your millet, or whatever combination of other grains, even rice, and maybe grain-free pastas, gluten-free pastas, as much as possible before noon. Later on in the day, that's a little bit harder for your body to properly digest and metabolize them, so you want to minimize that. Fats can kind of be spread out throughout the day, and they should be, especially healthy fats. So fats with high omega-3 fatty acid content, DHA and EPA, so those that are found in lots of nuts and seeds and fish, things like flaxseed, chia seed, and fatty fishes, salmon, mackerel, tuna, although it has a little bit higher mercury content. Those would be things that you could eat really throughout the day. Again, those sources, and beef, because they're a great combination of high quality protein and then also high quality fat. Olive oil. So stay away from the plant oils. Those are not very good. Coconut is good. Coconut olive is good. As I said already, flaxseed, chia, those are good. Sesame to some degree, but I encourage everyone to stay away from the canola, safflower, sunflower, peanut. Those are not good oils, just because they undergo a lot of peroxidation inside the body, lipid peroxidation we call it, and they're not healthy. So if you got any of those seed oils, throw them out, with the exception of maybe sesame. That seems to sometimes confer some healthy benefit. But olive and coconut, those are the avocado, those are really good oils. Those are really good fats. And so, okay, I've given you the amount of protein. You want to range somewhere between 25 and 40%. So the balance then should be your carbs and your fats. And if you want to eat keto, perfectly fine. Listen, go to 75, 50 to 75% of your intake is fat. That would be actually a great combination. And I encourage some people who adapt to that ketogenic diet because there's some real benefit. I'm less encouraging of that highly strict keto of up to 90% or 85 to 90%, which is the true keto. True keto is 85 to 90%, and then 10 to 15% protein and pretty much zero carb. I'm not a proponent of that. I just think that's too restrictive. And at some time we break mold and we drink a little orange juice or grape juice or have a little piece of a nice crusted Italian bread, and you're screwed. Really, you are. I mean, your body is just waiting for those things, and it just sucks them up. And it upregulates way too much your glucose receptors, and I just am not a proponent of it, unless it's under very controlled circumstances. People with epilepsy, for example, and experience seizures, that higher ketogenic diet can be very effective. People who need a very significant and abrupt weight loss, for example, before bariatric surgery, can benefit from that keto short-term diet. But for the majority of the population, 95% or more of us, it's just too restrictive. So a ketogenic diet or a fat-adapted diet of 50 to 75% is perfectly acceptable, or even maybe a little bit less and throw in some carb. Plant-based also very good. So if you want to go a little bit lower on the fat, although I would never reduce your fat less than 25%. So if you're at 25% carb and you're at 25% fat, you should be at 50% carb. So that would be more of a plant-based eater. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, but I think you said this was being recorded. So this is all really high level information. And I know I speak sometimes fast, I get excited about it, but what I just gave to you would be kind of my highest level of takeaways. And we haven't really talked too much about the the exercise and fitness, but I'm happy to do that, or some other diet, or I shouldn't say diet, but nutrition questions.
Well, if you don't mind, I mean, I know we said, but if you don't mind just going a little bit longer, because this information is to me is fascinating,
Well,
and I'm super grateful to you if you have just a couple more minutes.
absolutely. Are there questions specifically that some of you have? If you're okay with that, Sandy, I'd love to open it up, or if there's more things that
Yeah,
you want me to speak directed to. But
absolutely.
this is an
So
opportunity to have all of you speak to someone who was just on BBC. No, I'm just kidding. I
that's
actually would.
awesome. No.
No.
So I actually did have a question for you. You did touch on exercise. And what I'm wondering is, should the exercise also change as we get older? We see a lot of people, especially women in the gym on their cardio machines for 2 hours and nothing changes. So I did want you to touch on that. And of course, if
Great.
anybody else has a couple questions after that, just throw it in the chat.
Awesome. Let me talk on that real quickly. Yeah, so we're in a culture of absolute cardio, aerobic, endurance, whatever you want to call it. Anytime we go out and we exercise on a treadmill, bicycle, swim, elliptical, Peloton, we're just we've been duped. We've been duped into thinking that this is the holy grail to health. Now, there are some people who are exercise fanatics and have the time and the energy and the motivation to go out and do aerobic cardiovascular endurance exercise for an hour or more every day. I don't know who's doing that. Well, I do. I mean, there are some extreme people, but at some point their body's going to break down, and it's going to catch up to them. I've seen it too many cases, but nobody should be doing that. So here's what I would recommend. First and foremost, and I know this is going to sound like an absolute, selfish, I'll call it selfish plug, but if you don't have my book, definitely get it because it's based on all scientific data. It's called The Prize Life. And I go into great detail about those 4 different modes of exercise. And so if you want to just stay focused for just a second, this is really important. So I'm a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. That's the overarching body that oversees exercise recommendations. So when you read in the newspaper or on television, the radio, you read it online about the overarching organization in the world that sets exercise and fitness recommendations. That's the American College of Sports Medicine. I'm a fellow in that organization, meaning I've reached the highest level of status in that organization. In fact, in the exercise recommendations that you all read in the newspaper, on the news, wherever you see it, my research is one of the contributing scientific articles that has formed those recommendations. But I diverge a little bit from what the recommendation is. And the recommendation by the American College of Sports Medicine is very cumbersome. It's very well intentioned, but it's very extreme. And nobody can fit that into a daily routine long-term for optimal health. So what I've done is I've teased out 4 of the most important forms of human movement through the test of humankind that have the greatest benefit for us. And they are in order of importance. Number 1, resistance exercise. That would be like weight training, you going to the gym and doing weight training, or doing resistance functional training with bands and tubes and medicine balls and physio balls and TRX bands and you name it. That's the routine that you should be doing. And listen to this. Many, many studies now have confirmed this. You only need to do 60 minutes or less of resistance exercise a week. So for those of you that are going to the gym, and I don't want to, throw any gym owners under the bus, but based on science and based on the greatest return on investment, more than 60 minutes does not provide you any additional benefit. So if you are going to a gym, a YMCA, a fitness center, CrossFit, and you're doing more than 1 day a week, or up to an hour or more, it's not providing you any additional benefit. I hate to pop that bubble with all of you, unless you're into specific body sculpting and what they call it body sculpting, bodybuilding, physique training. Then you need to train certain muscle groups on a staggered basis, on a different split routine type. That so I'm not talking about those people. That's less than 3% of the population. So for the majority of us, 90% of us or more, who are just looking for health and fitness benefit and performance benefit, 1 day is all you need. of resistance training. So that is the most important exercise. So if you have nothing else that you could do, no other form of human movement other than one day, you should make it resistance functional training. And there's no debate about that. That's a known fact that resistance is much more beneficial, not for building big, bulky muscles, but for providing us a healthy body composition and weight, much more so than endurance. And I know that blows a lot of people's minds because they think the only way to lose body fat and lose weight is to do endurance, and nothing is the opposite. And you'll hear in just a minute. So first and foremost of importance is resistance training. You only need one day a week. So this is my prize life protocol. So on Amazon, it's called the Prize Life. So if you're interested, I would highly encourage you to get this book because it would be a wonderful resource based on science. Resistance exercise, one day is all you need. The second most important, so if you're someone who says, well, I don't like doing resistance exercise, Dr. Paul, is there any other form of human movement that I could do that could come close to getting me the benefit in terms of my body composition, my metabolism, my heart health, my mood state, that's close to resistance training? And I would say, yes, there is something that comes in second, but it would be the next most important one. High intensity interval. So interval, that's what PRISE is an acronym, PRISE. So this is the PRISE that I'm going through. So intervals is the next most important thing that you can do. And guess what? Just like with resistance, one day is all you need of doing this. And it doesn't have to be more than 35 minutes. So it's a very short workout. Resistance training, 40 to 60 minutes, that would be on the high end of what you would do. Intervals, you only need to do. So I work with a lot of people, even outside of my research studies, but just, everyday women, many of which are in that peri to postmenopausal phase of life. And so many of them have lost massive amounts of weight and kept it off for many, many years. And so just this morning, I was working with one of my clients, I'll call them, and she was doing intervals. And we only did 7 of these intervals, and we did them in this fashion. We warmed up for 5 minutes, very, very gently, lightly, just to get the blood flowing. And then we did 30 seconds, that's it, at the highest intensity that she could do. We were on a cycle ergometer, so we were on a recumbent bike. She pedaled as hard as she could against the resistance for 30 seconds until she was out of breath. And then she rested for 3 minutes. So I brought it all the way down to a level 2. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 would be what all of you are doing right now, sitting, watching, listening quietly. 10 would be you getting up from your seat and, sprinting or running or swimming or doing anything that you could do with your full body at the highest level of intensity. That would be a 10. So that's what she did. She did a 10 for 30 seconds on the cycle ergometer. And then she rested for 3 minutes. We did 7 sets of those. That's it. The routine was over in 30 minutes. And then she did a 5-minute cool down. And that is all you need when it comes to interval exercise. And again, I go into great detail in explaining all of these things in the book. There's also a second option you can do. You can do a minute for not at the level 9. So that would be just under your full all-out exertion. So you can go a little bit longer, and instead of resting for 3 to 4 minutes, you only have to rest for 2 minutes. Why? Because even though you've doubled the length of time, you've gone from 30 seconds to a minute, you've done it at a lower intensity. You've done it at a level 9. So your body recovers quicker. I know that's kind of opposite thinking. Everyone says, wait a second, if you're exercising really strenuously for a full minute, why do you have less recovery time? Well, because you were doing it at a slightly lower intensity. Whereas the 30 seconds, you were going all out. So your body needs an extra minute or so to fully recover. So I don't want to go into too much detail because I have it all very detailed in my book and I explain it. And it's all based on science, by the way. These have all been studies that I've been conducting for 35 years. The third type of exercise that you should do is stretching, flexibility exercise. And again, you want to do about an hour of that a week. Now, people say, well, I stretch before and after my exercise. It's not the same. So if you're doing that token, static stretch or dynamic stretch before you exercise, and then you do more of that static stretch after you exercise, you're still not getting the full benefit of what that stretching does for you. Where resistance and interval exercise cranks up your metabolism and helps you maintain your lean muscle mass and even build lean muscle mass if you're consuming that extra protein that we talked about earlier. It reduces your heart disease risk because it's very favorable to your heart muscle. It builds your heart muscle, that resistance in interval training. Stretching changes your mood. And you can't do it just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes after you finish your bout of endurance exercise or lifting, or it's not enough to trigger what is called your gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA. Gamma aminobutyric acid is a hormone that provides us that feeling of well-being, and dopamine and serotonin. So it's very, very favorable when you engage in that stretching routine. It's also very good when you do a stretching routine also, because most of the stretching exercises that people do after they exercise, they finish a hard bout of exercise, are more just for muscle flexibility. And that's only one dimension of our body's movement. You also need joint mobility. And so by taking the time to do a full concentrated session of just stretching exercises that incorporate muscle and tendon flexibility and then joint ligament mobility, it's a whole different, it's a whole different animal in terms of the benefit that it provides you from a physical standpoint, but then also from an emotional well-being standpoint. So stretching would be the third. Now, guess what? You're probably saying to yourself, gosh, Dr. Paul, you've mentioned functional resistance weight training type exercise is the most important. I can buy that. You've mentioned high intensity intervals, HIIT training. I've heard of that, and that I know has some excellent benefit. And then you described stretching, which, I've done some yoga, I've done some Pilates, I've done some, stretching type routines, plyoga, whatever it might be. You haven't even mentioned endurance exercise yet. And that's right. That's because that's the last form of movement that we should be doing for our overall health. It's not the best for food intake, because when we do endurance exercise, it stimulates food intake, which is why rarely anybody manages their weight with just doing endurance exercise. I call it endurance, but it's aerobic cardiovascular exercise. It turns on your feeding center. So every time you go out for a run or a jog or a swim or a bike or a Peloton or whatever it is that you do for your endurance exercise, just know you are turning on your pack women and pack men in their starvation response. They get hungry, man, and you got to feed them. So endurance exercise, aerobic, cardiovascular, whatever you want to call it, activates our feeding center. It makes us darn hungry. So that's why you just don't lose weight if you just rely on aerobic endurance exercise. It's not the answer. It should be the last exercise that you do. Now, that's 4 days. That's all you need. The other 3 days, I tell people, just be active. Go out for a walk with your dog, your kids, your partner, alone, work in the yard, do some housework. I don't know what. Just be active. Go shopping, but just move your body and be active. But don't exert in the way that you do the other days. And I always give the example. I've worked with professional athletes, having been one myself for a long time. They don't do what you think they do. When we see them on TV exerting at that high level of exertion, do you think for a second they do that more than 2 or 3 times a week? If you do, you're very misinformed. They don't come close to that. Their amount of high intensity training with resistance and interval exercise is only about 15, at the most 20% of their total exercise routine. The other 80% is at a very low, what we call pedestrian level of exertion, meaning you and I could engage with some of that activity. They're doing a lot of exercise, but it's not at a high intensity. So don't be misled. We have to stop this madness of thinking that, going to the gym and cranking out all the different types of high intensity exercise that people do for more than 2-3 days a week. That's just crazy talk. Nobody's doing that. Nobody. Nobody that wants to have long-term health and performance, and especially not the athletes that we admire so much on TV. All right, so that's my plug on exercise and the importance of keeping variety. And that was what was just written up, of course, in the BBC and all of these newspapers and media. I did a study that, again, proved the benefits of it. And for women, so here, I'm going to share this with you, hot off the press. This study just came out and was published in a leading medical journal last week, which is why it made such headline news. Women should exercise to lose belly fat and body fat in the morning. So your stretching and endurance exercise you should do in the morning. That might be beneficial to you. You might even want to do your interval on occasion, maybe save your stretching for later in the day. In fact, I'm sorry, that's what I would actually prefer to many of you. If you have body fat to lose, I would recommend that you do the intervals earlier on in the morning in the endurance. You could do those two things in the endurance. Save your resistance and your stretching for later on in the day. And the reason why you want to do later on in the day is because with women, late in the day, strengthening exercise, and stretching can be strengthening if you do a little Pilates in there and some pulse yoga type movements, is because that's when your body and hormonally is in the most favorable state to help build muscle. And so you're going to get stronger by doing the resistance in the late afternoon, early evening time period. And then the stretching, I like to have you do that too, because it's a great de-stressor at the end of the day for many people. So that would be my recommendation. But for sure, the data was very compelling that for women that want to lose belly fat, lower blood pressure, exercising earlier in the morning, those that want to build muscle, maintain muscle, and improve their mood, do those other forms of exercise in the evening.
That's fascinating. I'm
Yeah,
like,
it is. Yeah, it's great.
that's
Great
really
info.
fascinating. It's
You
so
guys, you guys
interesting.
just listen. You're the first group I've shared this with publicly, other than the newspapers and the radio and everyone else that's been blowing it up on
That's
the airwaves.
awesome. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. So, one quick question. So, Lynn asked with isogenics, of course, a lot of us are in isogenics, and she asked, can you mix the Isoline Pro, which is, of course, a lot of the studies are on, with plant-based isogenics protein? And if so, would you still incubate?
I do it every day. So yeah, I did it this morning. That's my morning routine for one of my eating occasions. So I do the Isoline Pro and I do the plant-based. So yep, I do about 50-50. So yeah, absolutely do it. I would incubate it, absolutely, just because of the Isoline Pro that you would want to make sure gets digested in a way to avoid any potential abdominal
So
issues.
once they're mixed together, you can still incubate. It won't hurt the other. I know it doesn't do anything to it, but
It wouldn't. No, I mean, if you wanted to, so I hear what you're saying. I mix it. I just for convenience and
okay.
ease, I put them in at the same time, let it sit, and then drink it.
Hmm. Okay.
But I could easily argue that just do the isoline, let that incubate for your
And
45
then
minutes or so, and then add your plant-based in. Yeah.
okay, cool. That's good to know. Perfect.
Yep. Yep.
So we won't keep Dr. Paul too long. We probably have time for one more question if anybody has another question. I can't wait for the recording because I know I'm going to listen to it again. Super interesting information. And I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for your time, for all the great information. I'm honored that we're the first ones to learn about the exercise. And so Karen asked, does yoga count as a resistance exercise? But you had already kind of addressed that it's more of a stretching. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yoga, I'm certified in two different forms of yoga, both of which are can be increased in intensity level in terms of the movement patterns. And so it's a little bit more muscle building for women. So there are two different forms of yoga that are primarily for athletes, but then also women, particularly in this age group, 50 years and above with menopause, to help with upper body strength. But yes, yoga definitely suffices for the stretching and the joint mobility, but can be kind of adapted to incorporate a strengthening. So I hold the planks a little bit longer. Some of the cobras, I have us do some arm movements when we're in crescent in warrior pose. I have them do just some additional arm movements that are really muscle building. So yeah, I know I'm getting a little bit, so for those of you that don't do yoga, I'm
Yeah.
naming some terms that probably don't make any sense to you. Chair pose is unbelievable for the glutes and the core. So yeah, I mean, the way that I teach it, but it can be adapted. I can make it more flowing vinyasa type, but yes, yoga can. That's why I recommended that you do the stretching in the evening to help build some strength and also be a de-stressor depending upon how you
Right.
move through it. So that's a great question. Yep.
Awesome.
And I actually talk about all that in my
Yeah,
book.
no, definitely. It's definitely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm just so grateful. This was phenomenal information. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again down the road. But thank you so much, Dr. Paul. Everybody, thank you for hopping on. Have a
You're welcome.
great night.
Thank
Thank
you.
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 Bye bye, everyone.
Bye now. Thank you.